And I think we realised we had to do something radically different because what we were doing just wasn't working. And we wanted to build this different ethnographic relational model of public services, and not just do it as a project, but do it as just the way we work, 365 days a year, and not just in social care settings, but in everything: environmental teams, planning teams, lawyers. It's quite hard to get lawyers to think person and to think ethnographically, but there was something magic, wasn't there, about that time? And even seeing you now on the call, it kind of reminds me of the energy and the kind of excitement that there was.
That idea that things were happening and people wanted to be part of what was happening was infectious, I think. And I think people caught on to that idea that if you were going to do things, try things, work hard, that you were going to get recognised for that and rewarded. Wigan had a kind of humbleness that no matter the specificities of Wigan, that there was no reason why Wigan couldn't do things. And I do sometimes encounter, when people are trying to make a change, often that's thrown back at me, oh yeah, but we're not like Wigan because this and this. Nowhere is, everywhere is different, and nowhere is uniquely special. And I do think it's sometimes used as an excuse not to act.
We really worked extensively on how do you listen differently? How do you develop a blank mind, not assume things about people, and really try to build a relationship based on trust rather than processing people and assessing them and passing them through the system.
Part of the problem is that Wigan was so successful that I think that other places have sort of wanted to buy a bottled version of whatever the secret sauce is. And I have been asked over the course of the last 5-6 years to come and deliver that training you delivered, and somehow wholesale system transformation will happen on the other side of that. And I have to have these very awkward conversations where I say, look, the training was just one part of everything that went on, and yes, the training works, but it works within a context, a context of change. And I think that is the single biggest blocker elsewhere, is that they want a viable process that costs X number of pounds, and out the other side you get this whole system, whole culture change. And I think even the best kind of processes require more than that. There's got to be a bit of organic stuff that goes along onside it, and that needs all that enthusiasm that we've just talked about. And critically, I think it needs senior leadership buy-in. There's the kind of formalism around asset-based approaches, as meaning community assets and individual skills and assets. But I always in my training talk about it's also an asset for us to know more about other people, and those things might be negative. So it's a curious kind of way of looking at the asset-based approach. But I always try and include that in my definition.
We can't keep doing what we're doing, can we? And when you think, Donna, sometimes it's like the 5th generational stories coming through the system, and you're thinking, what a failure, what a failure for us, because we've got an intention to do well and to do good, we want to make things better. That's why you come into public service, to support people to have good lives and happy lives, And in that space, we started to recognise that whole world of when somebody comes through the door, and there's a narrative about them, to set that narrative aside, because it's not written by them.
I think when thinking about whole system transformation, actually senior leadership is the key. I think for me, in one sense, as a consultant coming from the outside of an organization, I can come and be an inspiration, if you like, and so can others, come with really good ideas. But actually, this is about senior leadership taking an interest, having the energy, and making decisions. And it's like I say, it's not just about signing off, it's about becoming involved and being part of the change.
When one family's changes the whole estate, Donna. Do you know what I mean? It can change the whole estate. If that family's working differently and feeling strong, the impact it has on connections, it changes the streets. Who are change makers, and who do you think a change maker is? Who's a person? What embodies a change maker? If you think in terms of there are people that connect and relate, who in a moment in time a movement can emerge. Yeah, something happens and movements are built. And the part of that is you do have some charismatic characters emerge in that context. You know, I think of, you know, obviously the obvious people in civil rights justice movements, you know, the obvious people in terms of women and feminism, the obvious stuff in literature, history. So you can think in those terms that it is about always the connection with others and people come together with a set of ideas and feelings and realising other people feel that way and want to do something about it. But there's something about sometimes a charismatic person emerges. And I think Nicholas Croyce, you know, was incredibly charismatic. And there's a story there because his father was Charles Croyton, who was the director of the Ealing Comedies. I don't know if anybody knows the Ealing Comedies, but like the Lady Killers and all those films were made by his father. And I only found that out when I went to his memorial service, because I obviously realised I got the same surname. But it made me think about him in terms of this twinkle, you know, that he had in his eye. Do you get me? That there was something there about him that it just made me think about, well, I wonder what it was like to grow up in that space of, you know, being a father with this kind of amazing kind of, you know, stuff around comedy and filming and the post-war period and all of that. And it's like, it's almost as though something would be in the person like Nicholas that would come out somewhere else. That's what I kind of feel. I have no evidence for that, but that's what made me think. That's how I told myself the story. It kind of made sense why this little person would just do something huge. You know, when I mean little person, not in his life, because he's a huge person in life, and we met all these really interesting people at his memorial. Obviously touched so many people's lives over the years that he practiced in himself in his personal space. But it just made sense to me that this person would get to a particular point. He got to a particular point as a DJ, a district judge. You know, district judges do the grunt of the court work. You know, they do most of the cases. More complex cases may go up to what you call a circuit judge, and sometimes a leading circuit judge, and then cases that require high court decision making go up to the high court. But, you know, they do most of it, and they sit quietly, you know, acknowledged, I think, but not celebrated, you know. Not celebrated now because they're the ones keeping the system going. And they've got, in the last couple of presidents who've had to really recognise the role of DJs. But they have been, you know, they're at the lowest of the rung. And, you know, it didn't come from some sort of high court person or some famous national judge. You get me? It came from somebody in his own local space in the London courts, you know, just thinking, well, the Wells Court in the London, it was the Wells Court, just thinking, you know, about the people coming through the door and seeing the same mothers and the same fathers and then their children and other children coming through and thinking, not just what's going on out there and why can't local authorities do better, you know, which is a simplified response, but what can we do as a system? What can I do as a judge? What can we do as a court in terms of the authority that we have in people's lives and the reasons why judiciary emerges, you know, when people decide that wise people are going to be elected to help them make decisions about the wider community needs. This is the idea of community justice. And I think he had some of that in him around how could we make that difference? You know, what could we do with the social care system as part of the wider welfare system? What can we do to make the difference to the lives of these children and the lives of these adults? That's where it came from. It came from that lived experience as that judge, dealing with families after families after families and seeing the tragedy. Anybody who goes into an FTAC court will come out and tell you it's a very different experiences, and it changes their perception of what they think they're doing in terms of representation, participation, and what is the focus around healing and well-being, because it's always centered on what's going to be the best decision for children, but it recognises that children live in family systems live in communities, and you can't ignore housing issues, poverty issues, funding issues, how we deal with wider issues around violence. If you're in an FTAC court, you have to engage in all of that world, and you have to try and create opportunities, you know, for families to overcome the problems that they have, but also then support families, you know, to re-enter a space that's safer for them and more supportive for them.